The last stand of Grace Hamilton. In the heart of a bustling American city, amidst the towering skyscrapers and endless streets, lived Grace Hamilton, a brilliant young black lawyer whose name was becoming well known in local legal circles. Known for her sharp mind and unwavering commitment to justice, she had quickly made a name for herself in the world of civil rights law. Yet, no matter how many courtrooms she triumphed in, or how many accolades she received, Grace's true pride came from the small, unassuming home she shared with her family. Her family, like many others in the city, had struggled for years to build the life they dreamed of. Grace had inherited the house in a neighborhood that, once vibrant with diversity, had started to change as gentrification pushed the older, more established communities to the fringes. Still, she never thought she would face the ugliness of the past, those same racial tensions her ancestors had fought against. The landlord of their building, Thomas Quinn, was a man whose wealth came from decades of owning properties in low-income neighborhoods. Quinn had always been the type of landlord who believed in keeping his tenants in line. He rarely spoke to them unless it was to demand rent or enforce some obscure rule. Grace and her family had always paid their rent on time, kept the property in pristine condition, and followed the rules. But Quinn had made it clear that he had no love for people like them. It started with small things. Grace's daughter, Amara, had been denied permission to use the community park across the street, even though it was meant for all tenants. When Grace questioned the landlord about this, he gave a vague excuse about safety concerns without offering any real explanation. Then came the broken appliances that took weeks to repair, if they were repaired at all. Quinn's refusal to fix anything quickly had become a routine, and soon Grace realized that it wasn't incompetence. It was neglect, rooted in a deeper prejudice. But it wasn't until one fateful day that Grace knew things were about to escalate. It was the middle of the afternoon when Quinn showed up unannounced, standing on the porch with a look of disdain on his face. He had a stack of papers in his hand, his knuckles white as he gripped them tightly. He was about to say something when he noticed the framed photograph of Grace's late father, hanging on the front wall, a black man who had fought for civil rights and worked tirelessly for his community without a word. Quinn's eyes narrowed. He shoved the papers into Grace's hands and turned on his heel. "I want you out by the end of the month," he spat, before striding off without even letting her respond. The audacity was staggering. Grace stood in the doorway, the weight of the situation sinking in. This wasn't just about money or legal terms, it was about power. Quinn thought he could force her family out, simply because they were black, because they were the ones who didn't belong in the gentrified world he wanted to create. But Grace Hamilton was not the type of woman to back down. She had spent her life fighting for justice, and now she was about to fight for her home, her family, and her dignity. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings with her colleagues, and a few sleepless nights. Grace filed complaints, reviewed the lease agreement, and dug into every inch of the law. Quinn was breaking several housing codes. His attempts to evict her were illegal. The more Grace dug, the more she uncovered. The man was a racist, and he had used his power to harass other tenants of color over the years. He had evicted them under false pretenses, often for minor infractions or completely fabricated reasons. This was not just an isolated incident, it was a pattern. When Grace's legal team sent a formal letter, demanding that Quinn cease his eviction threats, he responded by ramping up the pressure. The harassment became more blatant. He cut off the water supply to the building, and when Grace reached out, his response was curt. "Fix it yourself." But Grace wasn't about to be intimidated. With the help of her colleagues, she filed a public suit against Quinn, outlining his long history of discriminatory practices. She gathered evidence, spoke with other tenants who had suffered in silence for too long, and began to publicly expose his illegal actions. It was the community that stood by her every step of the way. Word of Grace's fight spread across the neighborhood, and soon people began showing up to offer support. Neighbors, black and white, came to her door with gifts, food, and most importantly, solidarity. They all knew the battle wasn't just about one family's home. It was about the preservation of dignity in the face of systemic racism. Then, one evening, just as the lawsuit was about to go public, Quinn appeared at her doorstep again. This time looking even more nervous than usual, Grace opened the door slowly, her face calm but resolute. "I'm done," Quinn said, his voice shaking. "I'm getting out of this business. I can't handle the heat. You win, okay? Just leave me alone." Grace didn't flinch. She could see the fear in his eyes. He had underestimated her, and now the weight of his own actions had come crashing down on him. "You think that's enough?" Grace asked, her voice calm but filled with the strength of years of perseverance. "You think I'm going to let you walk away from this without accountability?" Quinn's face reddened as he realized this wasn't going to be a simple transaction. He had wanted her to back down, but instead he was about to face the consequences of his actions in full public view. A few weeks later, after a series of legal battles and mounting pressure, Quinn was forced to sell his properties, including the one Grace and her family lived in, to a fair housing organization. He was publicly shamed for his history of racist practices and sued for damages. The community, once fractured by gentrification and fear, began to heal. Grace Hamilton had won not just for herself, but for every other person of color who had been targeted by landlords like Quinn. She had shown them that, even in the face of overwhelming adversity, the truth could be a weapon more powerful than any amount of hate. As for Grace, she didn't just return to her legal work. She became an advocate for tenant rights, working to ensure that no one else would have to fight the same fight she did. Her work inspired a new generation of activists, and the memory of her stand against injustice lived on in the hearts of those who had seen her rise to the occasion. In the end, Grace's family stayed in their home, but it was more than just a house. It had become a symbol of resilience, of courage, and of the quiet, unbreakable power of a woman who refused to let hate dictate her future. And Thomas Quinn? He vanished from the city, a shadow of a man who had once thought he could wield his racism as a weapon. He never fully understood how it felt to be powerless, but now, perhaps, he had an inkling.